Welcome back to Let's Talk. Let's Talk, episode 12. Okay, let's talk to a liberal. Dun dun dun. No, I'm just kidding. No, this is one of my closest friends. We've been friends for like a really long time now. And I think you're my only like liberal minded friend where we can actually like sit in the same room and not like wanna kill each other. I'm sure you like feel the same, like vice versa, I don't know. But this is one of my closest friends, Lauren. So, Lauren, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Lauren. I currently live in Alaska, but I grew up in Des Moines alongside Anna. We actually met doing theater together, so that's pretty cool. But right now, I work at a reindeer farm. That's probably the most interesting thing about myself. And yeah, I think that touches all the bases about me.
Yeah, it was like I was kind of telling you before we got started, like I talk a lot about theater on the show, and I think you're the only person from my theater days that I actually still talk to because I remember when like I don't know, it's so dramatic. I don't want to be dramatic like that. It like when it first came out because that's like not what it was. But like when I first actually started like posting things that I thought because like that's what you do in this world. You just like have free speech. You can post whatever you want. And so I was like, "Oh, this is what I think about this." And everybody started like hating me and stuff. I remember, like us specifically having a conversation where I reached out to you like, "So, do you hate me now? Like what is
Yeah,
happening?"
and I had to be
And you
like,
were like,
I'm
"No.
not like that, Anna. I'm a normal
No.
person who's not going to
No."
judge you off of an opinion.
And that's kind of what you saying that is kind of like what the vibe I want for this conversation today to be. We've both established you and I have had a lot of conversations about like politics, about religion, all of that kind of stuff. And we've both established like there's really no changing minds. Like it's clear that what I think, you're not going to think, and what you think, I'll never think. And that's kind of like we just kind of agreed upon that. And that's why I thought you were the perfect person to have this kind of conversation with, where I can just kind of like poke your brain without it becoming like animosity or without it becoming an argument. Because I think that'll be really interesting for, like the conservatives who listen to my show to hear, like kind of somebody's thoughts without it becoming like overly emotional, without it becoming an argument from both of us, like where it's just like, what do you think of this? Why do you think that? Okay, moving on. Like, what do you think of this? Why do you think that? And this is the first episode where I didn't really like, I usually type out all the questions and I pre send them. This one, I really wanted it to just be like, more free flowing and like see where it goes cuz I've never really like you and I have had these conversations but we've never like sat down and specifically had these conversations. Does that
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, it
we've
just
been like,
kind of comes
"Oh,
up in passing.
yeah."
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like I've never like sat down and like interviewed you about like what you think and like what you believe. Like we've just it's just been like, "Oh, did you see this? Yeah, okay, talk talk talk. Okay, bye." Like
Yeah.
so it's like I know what you think, but it'll be interesting. Like I was thinking about this today. I was wondering if anything you were going to say was going to like surprise me at all or so it'll be good. It'll be fun.
Yes.
I hope.
It will
Hopefully,
be.
we are still friends after this. Watch me be like,
Oh
"This is
my
gonna be
god.
so great. We're not gonna argue, and it's gonna get like super intense, and like everybody's gonna hate us." Okay, it won't happen. It won't happen.
We promise.
Knock on wood. And no, and like the inspiration came. I was telling you before too. The inspiration really came from like all those, Jubilee videos and stuff. Like I can't watch those anymore. I used to be able to, and I just cannot because it becomes so emotional and like so like argumentative, and it doesn't matter like who is sitting in the, it's like I'm talking about the ones where it's like 25 people and then like one person, whether that's like a conservative. I've seen like a liberal do it as well. It's like it doesn't matter who the 25 are, and it sometimes it doesn't even matter who like this person is. It's like it always becomes argumentative. It always becomes like very emotional, and it's like again, like that's why you were the perfect person to have this conversation with because I wanted it to be just like what, goes on, like what is the thought process behind some of this stuff that maybe like some conservatives don't understand or it has become too heated to like really get down to the root of. And so, I kind of wanted to start a little bit because at least for, conservatives, I think it's sometimes hard, not really hard, but I think sometimes, we don't separate like our political views from our like religious views. Like usually those a lot go hand in hand. Like for example, like when we talk about abortion, usually for us it's very like Christian based. Like our views are because of, in the Bible how it talks about like God knitting us in the womb. And so like that's and all of that. And that's kind of like where we start off from. And then obviously, there's science and then that comes into play, but that's kind of where we start. And so one of my questions was to kind of get us started, like, how did you grow up religiously and politically? Like, what did your household look like with those views?
Good question. So, first, religiously, my mom is not religious at all. My dad is a Christian. He doesn't go to church. I never went to church growing up personally. My mom actually got me baptized out of fear that other moms would judge her if she didn't. So very, very not religious upbringing at all. Um, Politically, though, both my parents are Democrats. They always were growing up. They still are today. Um, and not just liberal, but like Democrats. And that's one thing about myself. I don't really align too much with the Democratic Party, but I am definitely more of a liberal leaning person. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers most of my background and how I grew up in that way.
And shout out to your mom because she is a lovely lady. She has
She
always
is.
been so kind to me, like
She
genuinely.
loves you. You are like her favorite person.
I should be. I'm just kidding. I should no. She is like my favorite like friend mom. Does that make sense? Like she's always been
Yes.
so nice. Talking about, like growing up, your parents were more like left leaning. Like obviously you're talking about like, you guys didn't go to church, etc. So from childhood to middle school into high school, like what was your view on, Christians, conservatives, Republicans, like that kind of like group?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always raised to be respectful of people with different religious backgrounds, different political views. We had friends and family of other different views, and very religious family members too, and that's never really been a thing that I've ever viewed as something to get upset at or something to upset me. I will say though, getting into like the end of middle school, sort of early high school, when I was just on my phone all the time, seeing just countless bits of media, I was definitely seeing a lot of stuff that had a more hateful tone towards conservatives. Obviously, all of your social media, kind of caters to you. So I was seeing
Mhm.
a lot of stuff like that. Um, and so being impressionable and really trying like to figure out my political views for the first time, being old enough to understand it, I definitely had a bit of time where I was like, no, really uncomfortable by a lot of conservative views. um, but towards the end of high school, really learning and forcing myself to educate myself, I'm now again very neutral. It's not something that I would ever take as something to, how do I phrase this? It's never something I would use to judge somebody for, or it would never make me feel differently. I would never choose a friend just because they're a liberal gay person and not choose a friend because they're a conservative person. That's not the way that my mind works.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would say back in like middle school, I feel like with just so much. I mean, the example I'm going to use is about like gay rights and stuff. Seeing so much pushing of gay LGBT things, I think I was definitely swayed into thinking like, I like these gay people. I have friends who are gay. I have friends who are queer. The conservatives don't seem to agree with that at all. So screw them. That's not my thing. Um, but then growing up and learning, realizing that it's not the case, and it's not fair to group people together unless you talk to every single one of them, which nobody's gonna do. There we go.
No, and so when you're talking about like middle school and seeing hate, are you meaning like hate from like conservatives to, like gay people and stuff? Like, is that kind of like what you're saying? Or are you saying hate, like people were hating on conservatives?
A lot of both, honestly. Yeah.
And so when you kind of like graduated high school and, you weren't around like all of that stuff, because obviously you and I have like different upbringings obviously. But like the public school versus homeschooled is a huge one because you know when you're in public school, like you are constantly like saturated by a lot of different people and a lot of different people's views. So when you were in high school, before I talk about you graduating, so when you were in high school, did you see a lot of like acceptance of other people's views? Like if me myself Anna were to be, where you went to high school, and I were to openly talk about, like how I was a Christian or how I, had conservative views, like did you see acceptance of that? And, vice versa, like when you were in high school, and if you're Lauren and you're like, I have these views about, being a liberal and all that stuff, like was that acceptance? Like how did that work, like with public school?
Everything was very divided. There was people who very strongly felt one way. There would always be somebody else who felt very strongly the other way. And high school kids are brutal, so they'd have no problem bringing up those issues, bringing up those fights, picking fun at other people's beliefs and opinions. And it definitely went both ways. The school, I went to two high schools. I went to one suburb school and then one more city based school. And those two vibes were very different too. The suburb school that I went to had a lot of conflict. There was a lot of loud opinions all the time. I would say the city school that I went to, it was a very, very diverse school, so it was already very much more liberal leaning. I didn't
Mm,
see as much of the outward conflict, but at that first school that I went to, yeah, people were very vocal about what they thought, especially, I mean, take history class, for example. You're kind of
mm.
forced to talk about your views with all these peers, and there's judgment, there's hate. So yeah, it was a kind of brutal situation to be in when it came to people with different views.
And so with you graduating and just kind of like, not being saturated in that world of like having to constantly discuss it in school or like, all of that stuff, like did you see a shift? Like were you still seeing, like even hate on both sides? Were you seeing like one side getting more hate than the other? Like how did your view of that hatred kind of like shift or maybe stay the same or
I mean, honestly, moving to Alaska after high school really changed a lot of my viewpoints on things, because just seeing how people interact here, Alaska is considered purple. A lot of people will call it purple because of how just mixed we are with liberals and conservatives alike. But here, everybody kind of has this kind of aura of like mind your own business and you do your thing, I'm going to do my thing. They don't need to affect each other and we can live in peace and harmony. And that's been great to see because it's definitely a night and day difference from what I experienced in high school. Everybody up here is beyond accepting of other people's views unless it gets to obviously a hateful or extreme place.
Mm. And so when you say accepting, you know, like I've kind of talked about this before. Like I actually just recorded an episode where I talked about this, because sometimes, people's acceptance can turn into like their own silence of what they think. Like I talk about theater a lot, where it's like, I didn't really talk about like what I thought. And I mean, you saw this firsthand because we did theater for years together. Like
Yeah.
I never brought it up. I never talked about it, but then in turn it kind of became something where then it was like I felt like I had to be silent about what I thought to show acceptance, which I don't think should be the case. Like I think people should be allowed to say what their views are without being forced to accept somebody else's views, because that's literally like what this country is built on and what free speech is. Like do you see a lot of that in Alaska, where it's like acceptance but silence in return?
Not as much. I would actually say that I saw more of that in high school too among some peers. You are the prime example of that, where a lot of that, and it almost comes from a place of fear of being judged. You feel like you can't speak up. I would say here, people are actually pretty loud about what they think. They're proud of what they believe in. They really just have that sort of mind your own business thing to them. I mean, a lot of the locals here, a lot of the people that I talk to, if you say something that they don't agree with, they will literally be like, "That's dumb. I don't agree with you, but here's a Coke. Have a good day." Like very, very
Yeah.
polite about having differences. So yeah, I would say that there's not. I mean, obviously, I don't know what everybody's thinking, so I'm sure I've encountered people who are agreeing just to stay silent because they feel like they can't express themselves. But personally, I haven't seen too much of that.
So you kind of talked about like you moving to Alaska and becoming a little bit like more neutral with your views, which is a pretty normal thing. Like once you graduate high school and you actually are forced to figure things out on your own is when you really, either pick a side or you're kind of like in like a middle area where it's kind of like difficult sometimes because you might think that one way about this thing that, liberals believe, but then it's all of a sudden it's like conservatives might have a different view on like a lot of times liberals agree with like taxes or like finances, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, I agree more with that. And so since you've moved and become more neutral, do you struggle to have conversations like with your peers regarding politics now that it might be like, oh well, especially because you've moved, so like when you catch up with people here in Iowa, do you ever find it difficult to be like, when they're talking, if maybe it's something that you've now changed your mind with, it's kind of like, well, actually, like, do you find that like as a struggle or?
Um, Not so much per se. I mean, kind of going back to what you were saying about remaining silent, I definitely do have some friends where I'm just not comfortable talking to them about the things I've changed my mind on. But that's a big thing for me is like being okay with changing your mind because I feel like people are always so stuck in the things they believe that they're unwilling to even look outside of the box. Um, but I choose to look outside of the box because that's the only way that you can learn and grow and change, become a better person, all those things. Um, but yeah, not too much.
So what are some of the issues that since moving you've become neutral on?
Guns is something that I've become very neutral on. Obviously I am very like I take gun control and gun laws seriously. I think that we need honestly some better things in place about that. But I used to think that guns just shouldn't be a thing at all. I used to think that there is
Mm.
no need for any civilian on earth to own a gun or have a gun, that they just shouldn't be sold at all. But up here, people hunt as their main way of getting food. Up here as well, there are moose, there are bears, there are wolves. It's good to have something to protect yourself with. And then finally, this state does have the highest crime rate in the United States. And having a gun can be the difference between me surviving or me literally getting shot in my own home. So my viewpoint on guns has definitely changed a lot. I think we need to be more careful. I think they fall into the wrong hands way too often. But I think that at the end of the day, they are a tool for us to literally keep us safe.
Mm, mm. And especially, like you living in Alaska, like you're living alone. And like you said, like obviously you're not living in the bustling downtown metro of New York. Like there's
Yeah.
not as many, people around you like to run to if you need something. And so, and so let's start there then. Like since you've kind of become more neutral about that topic, like I'm curious to see what you think of this because I feel like a lot of times, like an argument that I've heard, like for gun control, like what you were saying was, I used to think that nobody should own a gun at all, which almost puts the fault on the object instead of the human being that picks it up, because
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to agree at the same time. I think sometimes people with like history of mental health issues you know tend to all of a sudden be able to buy a gun, and I think those things can be scary because of the people that are buying them, not because of the gun itself.
Yes.
And so I feel like I hear that argument a lot from I'll say the left because people that watch this episode will understand like that lingo, the right and the left, because that's a lot of times like what people say. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's like the argument we hear a lot from the left is like, well, the guns, the guns, the guns. But it's like we need to be fostering and like caring for people. Like it's the people that are picking up these objects, and going into schools or going into movie theaters or, like even taking their own lives with them. Like it's these people that are like grabbing them, and so like would you tend to agree that that argument is faulty, or would you tend to agree with that argument?
I agree with what you're saying about how it really is it's the person who gets their hands on it that is the danger. I mean, me personally, if I ever had a gun, I would have no there would be no risk of anything, bad happening with that. So there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to. Um, Yeah, I feel like the biggest thing when it comes to what I would want to change with guns is background checks. And I mean, the sad part about it too at the end of the day and kind of going back to what my original opinion was of get rid of all the guns already exist. There's no
Mm.
getting rid of them. If they become illegal, they're still going to be circulating. People are still going to be able to get their hands on them. The problem is it's too big. I mean, I don't even want to call it a problem, but for the sake of this sentence, it's too big for us to just get rid of completely. There's no going back. The guns are here. So, yeah, it's the only thing we can do is try to better prevent bad people getting them.
So I didn't know you became more. I actually didn't know that you wanted, like, you were like no guns period. I did not know that
Yeah, I was
at all.
really really anti firearm for a while, but
But it's like I can't imagine going to a public school though and having that fear. Like I didn't obviously have that fear. Like
yeah.
I wasn't scared that one of my siblings was gonna, come in and do that, obviously, because I'm home. And so it's like I can't imagine though going to school and like having that fear, or like even running those like drills where it's
Yeah.
like if somebody were like active shooter drills, like I can't even imagine. And so that is like one of the issues. There's not many as I get older, but that is one of the issues where I tend to like show more grace,
Mhm.
because I can't even, when people are, like you, who are like, "Oh, I was completely anti-gun." Like I can't even imagine having to go to school on a daily basis and being like, like even right before we moved to Pella, the freaking nicest place on earth. It's like they literally had a kid bring a knife to school down the
Yeah.
street from us
Jeez.
and, like, attempting to do that, and it's like, and that was really like, wow, I can't even imagine in Pella, and it's like, if it happens, in your little tiny town, like, it's gonna happen everywhere, and so it's like, I can't that is an issue that I feel like I've learned to show more grace on, because it's like, I don't blame people, especially younger people like us who were like, we were just in high school a little bit ago. Like we just had to deal with those things. Like, so I just didn't know that you were like completely not for it.
Yeah.
But living alone I'm sure will definitely
It
change your
does.
opinion
It
on that.
does. Yeah.
So moving on, now that we kind of brought that up, let me bring us to, I'm assuming, a not neutral topic
Okay.
that I was going to start somewhere else, but I'm going to start here because I feel like this topic will stem into a lot of what we're going to talk about. So this is like the big kahuna of it all. I don't even know I don't even know how to ask a specific question about this. So I'm just going to ask the
Okay.
overarching. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump?
Alrighty. Yeah. So
Yeah. I like this is where we're starting. I'm like, you know what? Because if we start at the big kahuna, like all the
exactly.
other issues will kind of trickle down from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I think he's an idiot. I think that he is an idiot. I think that a lot of what I see when I see him speaking, when I see him doing things, I feel shame that that is the person who's running things. At the same time, though, I do understand. I mean, he's a businessman to start, and running a country is, I mean, in a sort of a way, it is running a business. And so I do think that he has qualifications, because I know that's one thing that a lot of people uh on the left really criticize him about is, oh, he's no experience, no experience. I would beg to differ on that. But just hearing him speak, I don't think that he is not an eloquently spoken man. I think that a lot of what he wants to do right now is, it feels performative to me almost. Some of the crazy, like the Gulf of America, really, really. That's just, why would we do something like that? Same with here in Alaska, people are very upset. He's trying to call Denali Mount McKinley again, and it's just things like that are so, what a weird hill for him to die on. When that, I mean, if you want to get into the whole nitty gritty of that, Denali, it's a native word. It's in Alaska, which has a huge native population. It's been called Denali forever. Renaming it feels like stripping history away. And I feel like a lot of the things like that he does, it just rubs me the wrong way, because there are much better things as president to be doing. There are people who need help. There are systems that need to be put in place or checked. Renaming a few things into a stupider name is really just, it's not doing anything, and I don't understand it. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts. I don't like him. Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't hate him. I don't have any ill will towards him. I'm not wishing death upon him. But he's not my favorite. I don't think he's my favorite person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what were your thoughts on Biden then, as during his 4 years?
So during his 4 years, I think that he did all right. I will say, even from the start of his presidency, it's sort of the same thing with Trump, where it's watching him speak it makes me feel shame for living in this country because I mean, towards the end, he could barely form a freaking sentence. That should not be what we want for America.
Mhm.
I think that I mean, another thing too to remember, or that I always have to make myself remember, is that even though the president is kind of the front runner, they're not making every single decision. They are not the end all be all of the government. Um, yeah, I think that there were problems under Biden. I think he also fixed some things. I don't think that he was perfect at all. Um, I really, honestly, so far, I don't think any president has really blown me away on their accomplishments, at least in my lifetime.
And so, yeah, that was a good added. I was like, that was a good added during your lifetime.
Yeah,
I was like,
the like
don't
three
diss
I've
our
seen.
man George Washington. Don't diss our man Abraham Lincoln. I'm like, girl, don't diss these people, you
Dude, I would never dishonest Abe. Sorry.
No, but I knew what you meant, but I'm happy. I was gonna add that if you didn't add that because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just said that. No, but
Screw
I knew what you
all of
meant.
the presidents. They all sucked. They've done nothing. Cut that out.
That would have been so fun. I was like, wow, okay, she like hates all presidents. That's
Oh my
crazy.
god.
Okay, um, no.
That's my legacy.
So okay, so then that brings me to what were your views then? Because then my assumption is you voted for Kamala.
I did, yeah.
So what was So obviously if you voted for her, there are things you like about her. And so what were your reasonings? So this is something that I want to tee up and put out there and see what you say. Because I think like you were kind of talking about earlier, conservatives as well, when you're on social media, you get a lot of things that are biased towards yourself, but that's just how social media
Yep.
is written. That's how algorithms are written because they want to keep you going. Like when you watch TikTok, like it's literally called your For You page because it's
Yeah.
based off, it's things to keep you coming back. And so when I, as a conservative, would watch a lot of people, explain why they liked Kamala, there was really no answer other than, she was a woman, she was not white, and she was for abortion. That was kind of the vibe from what I was seeing was
Yeah.
basically those three things. Like there was really no naming of, other policies or anything else because, in my view, Biden basically left no legacy behind and his kind of parting speech was right before he left, he pardoned all of his family members for crimes that they may have done from, years back to now. And it's like, and things like that. It's like, okay, and so it's like, that's what we're going to do on our way out. All right. And so, there were things that he wasn't really leaving a legacy because also I don't even think by the end he understood where he was really what we were talking about and what
Yeah.
you said. And I completely agree. And so going back to that, that's a lot of what I saw was people could not explain why are you voting for her other than she is not Donald Trump and then all of the other things I stated. So, why did you vote for her? Why did you feel like other than the reasons I stated, why did you feel like she would be the best president for the United States?
So, first and foremost, and I think I can speak on behalf of a lot of liberals when I say this, the biggest reason for the majority of us was truly a lesser of two evils situation. Her being a woman was definitely like cool. She's a woman, but that's not going to change. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's that wouldn't make her better or worse. I think it's kind of a redundant, kind of ridiculous point. Um, but I thought that she did a decent job as vice president. She's very very well spoken. She's very smart and calculated in the way that she speaks. Watching her in the debates that she was in, I think that she just is very well spoken. She knows what she's talking about the majority of the time, at least to my knowledge. And that's kind of what I want in a president. I want somebody who can speak to wide ranges, groups, ages, religions, ethnic backgrounds of people, and be able to maintain um, just grace while doing so. And I think that she was pretty good at, making appearances and talking and not saying stupid stuff that makes no sense, not literally not forming a sentence, not falling off of a bike like Joe Biden did that one time. I just think that she was much better. She was a much more approachable person. And I think that as the forefront of America, because that's essentially what the president is, I want someone who's approachable and nice, who comes across as a put together person.
So I definitely see the vibe when it comes to Donald Trump because of the fact that, and I even said this on another episode that I did, where I struggle sometimes with the way he goes about things in terms of how he says things, because you are correct. When you become president, you are the president for everyone.
Yep.
And sometimes his personality is very difficult to get behind. And which kind of brings me to, what are your thoughts on JD Vance, his vice president? Because yes, I'm assuming you don't agree with any of his views because he shares all of the same views that Donald Trump does. But I would beg to differ that his personality is like 10,000 times more likable, more approachable, more conversational than Donald Trump's. And so when, and I mean, JD Vance to me wasn't always like some political person. Like when they said JD Vance, I'm like, that name sounds familiar, because I remember watching that Amy Adams movie with him about his childhood and how he like grew up, and he basically is now living the American dream. His, mother and grandmother were, his mother was a drug addict. He lived a horrendous life, but grew up, became a politician, and is now literally like the second highest in command, And so what are your viewpoints on him?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of hit the nail on the head with the fact that I don't agree with anything that he says for the most part. But going back to the reasons why I voted for Kamala, he is very well spoken. He does not say stupid stuff in public. Because I watched all of the debates, and he was super well spoken. He had the facts, and that's something that I do. I mean, not agreeing with the subject matter, that's what we need in people who are in these higher positions, though. So I have to give him points for just, he never really looks like an idiot, and I have to give him points for that. So yeah, other than that though, not my favorite guy, but I do appreciate that he's able to talk normally and make his point while maintaining being respectful and having the facts.
And it helps, I think, too, because he's younger, and so he kind of like has more of that like quick with it vibe,
Yep.
And I it Tim Walz, who was going to be Kamala's vice president if she was elected, was difficult for me to listen to
Yeah.
personally. He was a very difficult human being to like. Not even because of the different views. It was just honestly the personality thing. I'm like, we're not vibing. It's very off putting, some of the things you say. Like, would you agree with that? Kind of the Tim Well, I mean, or maybe her picking him, you were like, oh, that's a good angle. Like, what was your thoughts on that?
I don't have a super strong opinion on him. I do like him though. I remember liking and hearing what he said. He did have one little like mess up in his debate. I remember where he just kind of was talking about, he kind of sounded like an idiot. Um but I do back almost all of his opinions and viewpoints. So I do like his policies, but yeah, not, it's just kind of like you said, I'm not really vibing with him. Just never really was.
Mm-hmm. So let's go into some of these opinions and viewpoints now that we kind of like have set the tone of what we think of, the top political contenders. Let's go into the meat of all this, which would be obviously the issues. I feel like we've given good background to everything else. So let's start here, because this has been kind of a huge conversation recently, which would be women's sports. That has been a huge topic recently because of when Donald Trump was elected, he signed an executive order that did not allow men who believe that they are women in women's sports and in those spaces. And obviously that has created quite the uproar and quite the, contention. And so, I mean, open-ended, what is your viewpoint on, men and women's sports? What is your viewpoint on his executive order? What do I know that you have friends who are transgender, and we've even had this conversation before, and so that's why I feel, you know, open to saying what I think and just like letting it hang out there because I
Yeah.
know what you think. And so what were your views on his executive order and all of that?
To answer that question, I want to start first by just saying that I support trans rights 100%. I don't have any issue with transgender people at all. I think that a lot of the issue is certain trans people are not trans people at all. They are pedophiles, they are predators, and it's unfair to lump those people together because they're not an accurate representation of what a transgender person is. Something interesting about transgender people is that you have met and spoken to, everyone in the world has met and spoken to countless trans community members and had no idea that they were trans. So I just want to preface by saying that I support trans people because I now have to transition to saying I kind of am okay with that bill being passed. It the better solution in my mind for this argument would be a separate league for trans individuals or just any individual who wants to compete with trans people. I think that it does pose an unfair advantage, especially because I know I see in a lot of the debates like, oh, but if they start hormone blockers early enough, if they do this, if they do that, it's just it's not fair, in my opinion, for the women who train their butts off to be where they are. And I wanted to mention my first bit just to make it clear that I don't have any ill will towards transgender people or transgender athletes, but I think that it's unfair of them too to not realize sort of the impact that's going on there when they can just take their sport elsewhere. I'm sure there are already leagues of transgender sports thingies that people can do. I know that if it's not an option, they could band together and make it an option, you know? Because I know the debate comes in a lot too. Like, what about women who have like PCOS and they have higher testosterone? That's not the same, and it just won't be the
Mhm.
same, you know? So that's one
Mhm.
thing I think that I know that another thing, I don't know if this has happened yet or if it's just been tossed around, but refusing to change the sex on like identifications and stuff. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that that's cool, but the sports thing, and that's something that I've tossed through both ends of the spectrum in my head for years and years and years, but at the end of the day, I really think that they should do their sport that they're passionate about, but they should just do it in a way where it's fair to the other competitors.
And when you say unfair and fair, like you think it's unfair, what do you mean by when you say, transgender athletes coming in to women's sports, what do you mean by unfair?
It's a biological advantage, in my opinion, at least, especially because a lot of trans women athletes that I've seen, they are very, very buff. They are buffer than I could get, even with steroids. And I think that the sad part about it is there are going to be exceptions. You know, there's going to be people who really aren't that much stronger than a biological woman, and I'm sorry to them. But it's just, there's too many instances where it's an unfair advantage where biologically a woman cannot reach those same levels of gains, levels of speed. Height plays a huge factor in sports too. And I know that's another thing that people,
Mhm.
and I even toss around where it's like, well, some girls are like 6'5". It happens, but it doesn't happen to all girls. It does happen to all trans girls though, at the end of the day.
And so why so there are things obviously that I agree with. There are set biological differences, you know, in the two because, one was born a man and one was born a woman, and there's just set from the beginning of, you know, creation set biological differences. And so we do agree on that. And so what do you think then, you know, and I'm just going to be blunt, and I don't mean to be rude. It's just I don't really know how else to phrase it.
Yeah, no worries.
What do you think then is the holdup in this argument? Because I agree with you to an extent. You know, obviously I don't agree with, and you know that. I don't agree with, you know, I just don't agree with transgenderism at all. But I do agree with you on the set biological differences that we shouldn't have biological men playing in a biological woman sport. So but and so you say that and I agree. And so what do you think then is the holdup? Like why can we not come to an agreement on that standpoint? You know, why is there this constant fight that biological men should be in women's sports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's definitely I mean, just like how I'm saying the unfairness of the biological differences, I think that a lot of liberals kind of flip that on its head and say that the unfair part is not letting people do this. So I think that it's a big debate of what's
Mhm.
fair and what's not fair. Um,
And so moving on from the women's sports angle to specifically, you know, transgenderism, because I feel like that is the next kind of like big contention piece is like yes, the women's sports, but just the overall arc of that, you know? And I feel like I want to like hear what you have to say because obviously we talked about different backgrounds, but I feel like even when I was growing up doing the theater stuff, back when I was like 14, 15, you know, I knew like one transgender person like that was in theater. And like I remember that being like not that crazy. Now, obviously, I disagreed with it, but it wasn't like they were a really nice person, like, and it was never talked about. Like, it wasn't like, "Hi, my name is this, and I am a transgender person." It was just like, "My name is this," and honestly, you know, for the longest time, like, I had a suspicion, but since that person never discussed it, I was kind of like, "Okay, I'm not gonna bring it up." And I was also 14, and back 10 years ago, like, I don't feel like this was that huge of a thing that you heard about a lot. Like I knew that one person and then that was kind of like it. And so what was your experience with this 10 years ago versus now? Like do you think that there is a rise of this because there are people who genuinely feel this way, or do you think there is a rise of this because that's like what's going on to society in society, so it's kind of like the cool thing to do, I guess?
Okay, yeah, so kind of two parts for my answer for this. First being, I guess I kind of want to touch on both of the things that you just said, with the first being just talk about how is it talked about more because people really are, and I think to an extent yes, and that's I hear the debate a lot when people especially when it comes to gay people and trans people, it's like, oh well, why weren't there gay people and trans people in the 1800s? There were. They would get literally prosecuted for it, so they had to keep it undercover. We're lucky enough to live in a society now that is more accepting, and so I think a big part of it is these people have always existed. This is the first time that they're allowed to be alive and be themselves, which is good. On the flip side of that, though, I see, especially with young people, and I think that it can manifest itself in different ways, but the being transgender is definitely one of them. But I also think of when people fake having Tourette's or when people fake having any sort of illness. I think that a lot of people, a lot of kids nowadays, there's definitely an uptick of that desperation for attention and transgenderism. And I hope that's not an offensive way to phrase it. I think that's the right term, but transgenderism is a way for people to do that, I think. And that's obviously, I don't think that's every case, and I don't think it's the majority of cases at all. But I think that a lot of the times when we see it, it's that we're seeing. When it's being shoved down our throats, or when you see it on TikTok and people making fun of them, all those things, I think it does stem from a place of wanting attention for younger people. Um, but yeah, at the same time, I do think that it's more accepted. I said earlier today, you know, you've interacted with trans people in your day-to-day life, you just don't know that they're trans. Because when people are truly transgender, with few exceptions of people who are really biologically at a disadvantage, but for the most part, the vast majority, it's not something that they talk about. It's not something that they project onto other people. And I mean, at the end of the day, the trans people that I do know, they hate being trans. They would wish nothing more than to not have to deal with that baggage and that burden. So yeah, I think that a lot of the young people who are very, very loud and open about it, I don't think it's always coming from the right place at all.
Do you believe? So for the longest time, people, it wasn't considered being transgender, it was considered gender dysmorphia, which would be considered a mental health disorder. Like that was something where, it would have been the same and categorized, if you had anxiety, if you had depression, if you were bipolar, you would also have, that would be on the same spectrum as gender dysmorphia. Do you believe then that being transgender is a mental health disorder?
In a sense, kind of, because just like you were saying, how it was considered that in the past, I feel like we don't use that phrasing today out of fear of sounding. I mean, it sounds almost barbaric, in a way. But at the end of the day, they come with a problem, they get medicated for that problem, and then they feel better. So at the end of the day, I think that it, in a sense, is, but not in the way that certain people would think, because the cure is letting them be themselves. The depression that comes along with being trapped in the wrong body, all of those negative emotions and things, the way to cure it is to, nourish the person you want to be. And so I think that, yeah, it sounds like such blunt language, but I think that it totally is, because it's a curable mental illness, and the cure is just letting the person do what they feel is right. Because I mean, the friends that I have that are trans, night and day difference of them enjoying their life. They go from hating every single thing about themselves, hating life, hating being in public, to presenting how they want to present, and they're suddenly happy, motivated, able to do the things that make them happy. So yeah.
So, okay. So there are a couple questions then along with what you just said. So, yes, you would categorize it, in a blunt term as a, mental health disorder, but the cure is to allow it, is kind of like what you're saying. And so, why do you think it is then that with being transgender or gender dysmorphia, since we're discussing it in like a mental health mindset, why do you think the cure for this one thing is to just let it be versus like depression? Like you wouldn't, if you're a therapist, you're not going to have somebody who's depressed come into your office and you're going to be like, okay, if you're depressed, then you just need to be depressed. Like you would, talk to them about why that is. You would help them, give them mechanisms to cope, to move away from that. The same with anxiety, the same with being bipolar. Like all of those, like anxiety, depression, bipolar, you're urging them to move away from that. Like if you, as a friend, as a peer, as a therapist, as a doctor, like you don't want them to have that because it is a disorder. So why do you think with this one thing, gender dysmorphia, transgender, why do you think it is then that they need to be encouraged to move forward when other mental health disorders they're encouraged to move away?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest part of that is, I mean, you kind of answered it yourself, honestly. Those feelings of depression, anxiety, horrible, debilitating mental illness, you don't want to move closer to that. And so when a trans person is coming out as trans, when they're truly transgender, the mental illness of it all would be leaving it unchecked, because leaving it unchecked is where that depression comes in. There's an extremely high suicide rate for transgender individuals. So it's really the real mental illness of being transgender is the baggage that comes with it when it is unchecked. So I think that the fixing of it is, I don't think it's necessarily perpetuating somebody further into mental health. I think that it's giving them the way to cope. It's just like a coping skill for anxiety. I mean, I feel like even just from like a female perspective, hating the way you look ruins your life. Like, it genuinely, it rules every single aspect of your life day to day. And just having that issue fixed can bring so much more positivity and happiness.
Before we move on, I have one more question about this specific topic. Is how do you view then children when it comes to, being transgender? Because, that is hard for, I mean, obviously the whole issue for conservatives, I have yet to meet a conservative true one that agrees with all of it. But the children have really become a tough topic for conservatives to discuss, because there are a lot of children who get, life-changing surgeries at 11, 12, 13 years old, and all of a sudden they grow up and they're like, "Okay, I actually was a kid. I didn't understand what was happening." And I've even seen a video of somebody on the left being kind of asked that, and they're like, "Oh, that's their decision." And then they're asked, "Well, if a 12-year-old wants to get a tattoo, should they be allowed to get a tattoo?" And they're like, "Well, of course not. That's forever." It's like, okay. So, that surgery is a forever, ideal. Like, that will change them and potentially and most likely scar them for their life. Like, what is your view on children transitioning as far as surgeries and irreversible drugs and all of that?
Yeah, so first of all, surgeries I don't think should be a thing until you are 18 for literally anything that's a cosmetic procedure. Um, but when it comes to kids, it's a really sticky situation because I mean, I'll just say, I guess the best example I can give you is what I would do if I had a young child who was showing signs of wanting to be a different gender. I would allow them to explore that with play with whatever toys you want. I don't care. Dress however you want. I don't really care. But I would still refer to them as my biological son or daughter and by their name. Um, as they get a little bit older, like middle school, high school age, if those thoughts and feelings have still not stopped, I would be open to doing like a completely non-medical transition where it's just you let your child get the hairstyle that they want, you let them present as that and maybe change their name or maybe change their pronouns, but not do anything drastic. The thing that I think a lot of liberals get hung up on with this debate is that, especially for men transitioning to women, if you don't go on those puberty blockers early enough, you will start going through a male puberty and there's no going back from that. And I might sound like kind of a bad person for saying this because I have clearly shown my support for the trans community during this entire conversation.
Mhm.
But I think that the needing the hormone blockers that early, I don't think it's right because of exactly what you said. There are too many cases of people not exactly knowing what they wanted, and I think that unfortunately that's just something they're gonna have to deal with, to be completely honest, because I mean, I even think about myself. I have tattoos that I got over 18 years old that I don't even want on my body anymore, that I got as an adult. So it's just, I am 100% all for socially transitioning if you so feel that. And the worst thing that can happen then if you change your mind is you look back and you're really embarrassed. That's like the worst. But medically transitioning, the hormones and stuff, I mean, I even think I would be more lenient to letting people pick around age 16, 17, 18 for that sort of stuff. I feel like it's pretty cemented in your mind at that point, and the hormones and things are things you can wean off of. There will still be permanent changes, like voice for men or for women who transition to men. And that's a thing where it's like, that's kind of like the too bad. Like, if you're gonna mess up like that, you have to face the consequences. Um, yeah, so I think it's a really hard situation too, because depending on parents, there are parents who are just like over the moon about it and will let their child do whatever at a very young age. And then there's parents who are like very, very anti-transgender who would never let that happen. And it's such a case by case when it comes to that too, that it's really hard to figure out. But there is one thing that I do want to say, because I just hope that this is made clear that the surgeries, very, very few and far between. Almost no qualified doctor, will perform those surgeries on anybody under the age of at least 16. And again, I'm pushing for 18. But the one thing that I just would like your side of people to know is that the liberals, like, we do not condone that either. The vast majority of people you ask are going to say absolutely heck no to top surgery of any sort or bottom surgery. Another thing to consider with that too is you can't even get those surgeries until you're finished developing. You know, you can't cut someone's boobs off if they don't have boobs yet. So I feel like there's a lot of misconception when it comes to the surgery. There are children who are allowed to medically transition with hormones way too freaking early, like way too early, to the point where that is just mind-boggling. But when it comes to the surgeries, that is one thing that doesn't happen as often or really ever.
So before we move on, I want to put in a note for people who are watching and listening, because I am going to get a lot of people who want this to be more of a debate than I am making it. I am not really making it one, like, and because you and I on this one topic alone could go back and forth, because there are things that I could say to you about things that you have said, and there are things that then you would come back at me and say back to me, and I would come back to you and then you come back to me. So I'm putting a point of contention in right here before we move on, that the point of this episode is not to be a debate, because there are 1,000 people I could call to do that would love to have an argument with me 100%. But the point of this is I just want to make it known that I'm sitting here because I want to listen to what you have to say, and you're here because you have things you want to say, and you're also willing to hear what I want to say. And I just wanted to say that for people who are watching and listening, that especially people that, of your friends who might be listening to you, and they're like, why aren't you pushing back on some of the things, I know that, like, I'm not using some of the terms or rhetoric that you guys would use, and vice versa. And it's like, you're going to have people who are like, well, why didn't you, argue with her? And people are going to come at me. And so I just wanted to point that out, that it's just conversational, not argumentative, not a debate. I just wanted to hear your viewpoint on these questions. So I just wanted to put that out there before we continue, because I don't want I don't want people coming at us, wondering why we didn't push back more. So I just wanted to say that. So the other big issue that I wanted to cover is, because I'd be remiss if we didn't, because we're both women, would be abortion, obviously. That's going to be the other big one too. When Donald Trump was running, he was not very clear on his abortion stance. He was very tiptoed, because he went from being the guy who, let in the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade, to then when he ran this time, he was actually pretty loosey-goosey with his abortion views, to the point where I didn't hear a lot of comments, from people on the left about that specifically, because he seemed pretty understanding. Now that he's gotten into office, in one of his executive orders, he has placed in there the definition that life begins at conception. And actually, him and JD Vance have been very specific about life. And a lot of conservatives have speculated that. Oh, okay. I don't know.
That was hilarious.
Woo! Okay. That's so funny. That's so funny. Celebrate. Woo! Yeah. Anyways, a lot of conservatives will speculate that he ran and tried to be elusive about his pro-life views so that he could get elected, so then that he could come in and, put more pro-life stuff in place. And so what is, maybe I'll just ask the fundamental question. When do you think life begins?
See, that's a really good question, because I don't think that it begins at conception, but I also don't think it begins during actual birth. I think it's somewhere in between there a little bit. Because, I mean, when you think about it, babies are born extremely prematurely and have perfect chances of survival and are able to live full, long lives. I mean, I can't give you an exact, like, this many weeks.
Yeah.
I don't have the research in front of me, and I don't want to misspeak, but I would say between conception and birth, probably about maybe a few months in there, couple months.
And so for the longest time, at least when, and you can disagree obviously, but when I was in high school, and a little younger than that, I remember a lot of times people, were pushing for abortion for you know, purposes if they had been sexually assaulted, or that was kind of the main one, honestly, like if they had been sexually assaulted. And then as I've gotten older, it's almost become more loosey goosey in a sense. It's not as much of, oh, I've been, sexually assaulted by a family member, or I'm extremely young of age. Those cases are actually, the numbers have actually dropped immensely in those, as far as like young of age or being sexually assaulted and getting pregnant and wanting an abortion. It's actually grown more into, oh, I've, had sex with my boyfriend and I don't want to have this baby because maybe I'm not financially ready, so I'm going to have an abortion, or, so I'm going to stop at that. When do you think it is okay for a woman to get an abortion?
Honestly, as soon as you find out if you're going to take the abortion route, I think it's vital to do it as quickly as possible. What is the current law? Is it 12 weeks?
It depends. It's dependent on state. So let's go with Iowa because I know that better. Iowa has a heartbeat bill. So we are at 6 weeks, because at 6 weeks you can go in and the baby has a heartbeat and everything. So anything after 6 weeks, you cannot, technically speaking.
Yeah, well then I would agree with about that 6 week mark, because that's enough time for you to realize what's happened, enough time for you to miss the period, and if you really want to make that decision, you need to get your butt in gear and do that as quickly as you can, to prevent, obviously, any other complications. So yeah, I'd agree with that. 6 to 8.
What circumstance do you think it's okay for a woman to get an abortion? Because I was talking about, like it used to be, I've been sexually assaulted, I'm going to get an abortion. But now you hear more, oh, I had sex with my boyfriend and there was no protection used, so now I'm going to get an abortion. Or, oh, this was an accident and I'm not financially ready, I'm going to get an abortion. What circumstance do you think it is okay?
Yeah, so I think the first biggest one for me is when the mother's life is in imminent danger. I think that if an abortion needs to be performed, or else the mother has, even like an 80% or above chance of dying, I think that it's more important to save the woman. My second one would be in the instance of sexual assault. That one's tricky though, because people can lie, people can say whatever they need to say to get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a nuanced thing, because you can't truly know why people are doing it, which is why it's so hard. Um, but I am 100% against using abortion as birth control. If you get pregnant out of your own stupidity, you need to take the burden and you need to live with it. You need to either raise that child or you need to put it up for adoption, but you did that to yourself. But yeah, biggest would be medically or sexual assault, especially of a minor. I don't think a minor, or like, I mean, a young minor, anyone under the age of 16, I don't think that they should ever have to carry a child that was not their choice or their doing.
So, something else, a reason for abortion that's come up, and it's interesting because the doctor, when I was pregnant with my daughter Autumn, kind of like, there was like a little bit of an innuendo with this. So when I was pregnant with Autumn, they asked me if I wanted to get a test to see if she had like Down syndrome, or, along those lines. Like it wasn't like if her life was at risk, it was like Down syndrome, etc. And I said no, because of the fact that whether she was born with Down syndrome or not, like she was my baby and I grew her for 9 months and I was going to love her regardless. But we've seen actually, and the doctors asked me multiple times, even after I had disagreed and said no, it was multiple times they had asked. And you're seeing this uprise now of some doctors coming to women, and when women are, shown that their baby might have a little bit more of a difficult life, they might have Down syndrome or something along those lines that's going to make their life and their childhood different than other children. Their doctors are encouraging them to have abortions. So, do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. I think essentially that's eugenics. I mean, when you think about it, that's not the A person with Down syndrome's life is just as happy and just as fulfilling as mine or yours. Obviously, I mean, if the baby would have a condition that would make life impossible outside of the womb, then sure. Um, but disabilities, things like that, limb differences, anything like that, to deny that child life that's extremely cruel. That I can't get behind that one at all.
So you said that so correct me if I'm wrong, you said that women should not get abortions after 6 to 8 weeks unless like imminent danger or or like you said like it would be impossible for the baby to live, etc. Unless those were the circumstances. So what do you view abortion as murder? That is something that conservatives say, and that I do believe as well, because you talk about like that 6 to 8 week mark, and there are a lot of people, on the left who think that people should even be able to perform abortions like up to like the 20-week mark. I've heard interviews of them saying that. And I mean, like you said, there's a lot of premature babies who are born and they can live. And so you are really truly killing like a baby that could be 100% viable outside of the womb that just needs a little bit of help a little bit longer than, like, let's say my daughter Autumn, who was born at 40 weeks, would need. So do you believe that abortion is murder
I do not view it as murder personally. No.
at any point?
I think that past, pretty much like you were saying, past that like 6 to 8 week mark, if it's not for it extremely, like doctor says 100% you or baby is 100% going to die, unless that is the case, I think that it should be considered murder past that 6 to 8 week mark. Maybe even, if we really want to push it, 12 weeks. Anything past that, I would say, would be considered murder. But I think that those really early on abortions, I don't think there's enough to work with there. Um, as soon as a child would be able to have even a shot outside of the womb, and you decide to kill that, then yes, that would be murder.
So you hear a lot of the times, like people who are on the left will use the term fetus instead of baby, which ironically fetus does mean baby, so it in the original definition of the word, but they use fetus to almost kind of disassociate from the idea that it is a baby, or according to their terms like could be you know a baby. Do you think that people on the left have really become inhumane when it comes to the conversation and the topic of abortion?
No, I don't think it's become inhumane. I think that there are definitely people on the same side who take it too far. And I think another thing, like you were talking about, something that I liked that you brought up was kind of how, people are using it as birth control. And I think that a big part of that is, I mean, when I see on social media, it's a joke now. People are so beyond comfortable making jokes about abortions here and
Mhm.
there. Doesn't like it's not treated with any sort of respect
Yes.
or realizing the gravity of the situation.
I agree. I think it's become something that it, like you said, is now being used as a joke and is now being considered something where, oh, I've screwed up, so I'm going to go, take care of the problem. And it's this issue has always been one that even when we were like in our theater days and I was, being like super quiet about what I believe, like it was the one that was always a huge thing for me and has only become bigger because of giving birth and watching like the growth of Autumn, and it's it's hard for me when people on the left, don't see it as a human life, because I remember going into like those ultrasounds and at first it can be hard to kind of associate with that because you go in and like Autumn was like literally the size of a pea and it's like nothing's happening, nothing's moving. But as you're watching like this growth and you're like seeing this like heartbeat and you're like watching it move, it's like it's hard to hear sometimes like how it is being, joked around, and how people on the left do kind of take it lightly, what is an issue that conservatives joke about or take lightly that people on the left take offense to, just like I was talking about how abortion is one of those?
Yeah. This might not be the best example, but the fact that I think a lot of conservatives, the only thing that they offer after school shootings or terrorist events is thoughts and prayers. That's sort of something where it's like, and that's not even, trying to be funny. That's just, it feels like it's just missing the mark of respect when that's all you really have to offer for that problem. Another would be gay marriage. That's, I know, one thing that a lot of conservatives feel very strongly should not happen. Blows my mind because it literally would not affect them one bit unless they're a gay person trying to get married, which in that case I don't think they would be against it. But yeah, I would say those two things are maybe not treated as harshly as they could be. But again, it's not everybody. It's not everybody at the same extent either. Some people take things really far. I mean, obviously jokes about school shootings are made all the time, and some of those are made on both sides. But yeah.
What is something that conservatives believe? So you touched on it a little bit, like gay marriage and things like that. But what is something that conservatives believe very strongly that you just cannot comprehend and do not understand? Like, and it's something where it's like for example, like with abortion, I know that you can see where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I know that.
Absolutely.
And it's like you can at least come to a semblance of understanding. Just like how we were talking about guns earlier. I can come to a semblance of understanding because of you going to public school and having to go through drills and seeing that. So, but what is something that conservatives believe that you're like, I just can't even come close to understanding where you're coming from?
Yes, I don't even have to think about this one. I have my answer right off the bat.
Okay.
The banning of books in school blows my mind because education is all about, and a lot of those texts obviously are historical, they're from the past 50, 100 years. But knowledge and learning, it's not always comfortable. And what's crazy is a lot of the books really don't have that intensive subject matter. But I think it's really, it's again, just like I was mentioning about the Denali thing, what a strange hill to die on. It's education. It's books that have been taught for centuries already, and they should be continuing to be taught. A lot of them teach really important lessons. Like, have you ever read To Kill a Mockingbird?
Way back, way back. So
Yeah,
I don't remember
me
much.
too. So I don't remember too much either, but that book has extremely prevalent themes of not being racist. Which, why would we ban a book about not being racist? There's no sexual content in that book. There's no outward violence or anything that is truly disturbing for middle school, high school age kids to read. So the fact that it's being banned, it rubs me the wrong way because what's the real motive behind banning that?
So, do you think then that it should be allowed for the Bible to be taught in public schools as well?
I think absolutely it can be. I don't think there's any issue with that. Um, I think that honestly, like even better pitch would just be to teach about multiple different religions so that everyone can better understand their classmates. I don't think religion is this scary thing that we need to shy away from. Especially like I know that Christians get a lot of hate, a lot for how do I phrase this, for bringing it into schools. But I think that first of all, if you want to send your child to like a Christian or Catholic school, they will get all of that education there. And if you really are focused on that for your child, that would be the route that I would suggest they take. But I don't see any issue with sharing about religion and things like that. The biggest thing for me is just not trying to indoctrinate anybody because the Bible, I've like halfway through the Bible that you actually gifted me when I was
Really? Really?
yeah, I really like it. It has some extremely good, very well phrased pieces of advice that are universal, that can be applied to anybody in a vast array of situations. And things like that, I think would be great for more people to know about. I don't think that it has to be some like, here's the Bible, now you're a Christian. I think it could just be, here's some beautiful writing that can teach you a lesson. I think that that's important.
So, where do you think we go from here? I mean, we've talked a lot. We've talked a lot, obviously, about your views on on Trump. I will add that I'm happy that you don't want to see him dead, because obviously he's been shot at twice, and there's been a lot of people who are like, I wish they didn't miss. I hate that. I don't want people on the left to be, shot and killed. I don't want anybody to be shot and killed. We shouldn't live in a society where we hope that leaders or our peers, whether they believe differently from us or not, to obviously, unless they're like freaking the worst people on this earth, but I'm saying, like, to an extent, obviously I don't want these people to be, shot and killed. And so that's one like, I wish more people could come to at least that. The amount of things I saw, on
What a
these
crazy
attempts
suggestion.
were just like the amount of things I saw on the attempts on Trump's life, where people are like, I wish they didn't miss. Next time, don't miss. Like $20 if you don't miss. It's terrible, because and I don't want anybody to be killed. And I'm happy that we can at least come to that today. You know, but it's like, where do we go from here? Obviously, Trump is going to be president for the next 4 years. Things are going to happen and go down that you do not agree with. And even some things that people on our side, things that are starting to come out that we're kind of like about, but 90% of the time we agree with. How do you think, a lot of the times I hear conservatives say, we cannot share a country with people who believe what you believe, because it's so divided, it's so different. Because even with transgenderism, with just the rhetoric, our rhetoric just in this conversation is two different things. Our view on abortion is sometimes two different things. How do we go about the future? How do you think we share a country with each other?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think there's kind of like one of two ways that things could go. Um, First, like you said, the divide, it is just so prevalent right now. I am genuinely scared that it's going to run even deeper, because I'm already seeing just, I mean, how long has he been president? Less than a couple months, and there's already so much tension that I haven't even seen in like years now, honestly, since he was president for the first time. And I think that sometimes it just feels so calculated and strategic. It's almost like there's a benefit to having the two sides be so at each other's throats. And it really breaks my heart, because what I would want to happen, the other way that this could go, is that we finally realize that we're fighting a losing battle. There's no winner, there's no loser. There are people who want to do their own thing, and I think that the best thing that we could do as a country is have more conversations about the hard topics instead of shying away from them, because I feel like so often we're scared, and a lot of it is valid, like how you were saying earlier in the theater community, it's hard to speak up, you have to stay silent. But I think that having more conversations would really help, but mostly just adopting the Alaska mindset here of just let people do their own thing and you can do yours. You don't have to love everybody, but you can be nice. Like I feel like coexistence is so possible if we could all, and I mean all, like every single person has something that they need to just let go. And that's not saying to erase what your thought is on that certain thing. Um, but I just think if everybody calmed down a little bit and talked to their neighbors more, we would realize that we're not that different. I mean, I think everybody wants the exact same things in life. It's to be healthy, to have your family be healthy, to have a livable wage, and to have a roof over your head. That's all everybody really wants. We have the same goals in mind. I think it's time that we break down the walls of all these little nitpicky things that we hate about each other and realize that at the end of the day, we want the same things.
So, last question to the conservatives that are listening. What do you have to say? I mean, and it can be anything. It can be, a piece of advice. It can be, chill out. It could be like, what do you have to say to the conservatives? Because it'll most likely be all conservatives, unless your specific friends. Yeah, but what do you have to say to them?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I just want to say that I have no ill will towards anybody just because of a political party. Um, the advice that I can give, the thing that I would encourage you guys to do is just listen to more people's stories. Be open to hearing from people whose background is different than yours. And I'm not saying agree with them. I'm not saying debate with them. I'm just saying broaden your horizons. That could go to liberals too, which again, who's watching? Not the liberals, but that just for anybody with strong opinions, it's so important to step back and just see the bigger picture every once in a while. And it's not going to bite you. Like, it's not a scary thing to, indulge a different article, maybe from a liberal point of view, just so you can see what's up with that. I think that, yeah, to end the divide, we have to actively do something about ending the divide. And you can come to agreements with people without having to change what you value. And I think that me and Anna are the perfect example of that.
Okay, I lied. One last question. So you said so when you moved to Alaska, for context, I was like so nervous because I didn't want it to, you came to church with me like a couple times before you left because it's something that is really, obviously big in my life. It's my identity. That's where I find my identity is in Christ. And, right before you left and moved to Alaska, I gave you a Bible because, I knew you were going to be living there alone. And it was something that was really important to me. And you had, shared with me that you were interested in learning about all of the different religions and I was like, well, who better to give you a Bible than me? And so what is one of your, favorite things or stories? And you don't have to quote it from memory, obviously, but what's one of your favorite things or stories that you've read as you've been, reading the Bible?
Yeah, so I've skipped around a lot in it too, and this is kind of random, but my brother's name is Matthew, right? And so out of curiosity, I read that section and I really like it. So that would be my answer.
Matthew is good.
But overall, the thing that I just like about it is the way that it's almost like it's very poetic in the sort of metaphors and word choice that is going on. And I just like how universal it is in the way that, you can read and enjoy the Bible at any age, of any race, of any religion. I'm not a Christian and I'm having a good time reading it. I'm not doing Bible study at home alone, but I flip through it quite a bit, and I think it's a comforting book to a lot of people, and I don't think you have to be Christian just for that to be comforting. But yeah, shout out Matthew. You're awesome in the Bible.
In the Bible. And that was Let's Talk, episode 12. Let's Talk to a Liberal. I think this went well. I don't think there were any points of, argument. And there are going to be a lot of people who wish this was an argument and are going to be mad that it wasn't, and then argue with me. And that's okay, because I think we did the point, and I'm happy about how it went. And yeah, so I appreciate all of you for listening and for watching. And you can watch and listen to this on X, Spotify, Rumble, YouTube. And yeah, thanks for watching.